We're back. So sorry, Steve, that you're driving around a car in Manhattan or something ridiculous as opposed to hanging out with us. But Tati, you and me, we talked about this off camera. I am a nerd, obviously, but I'm a pretty big nerd when it comes to Snowflake in particular. I know that you know I was out at the summit last week, and I spent a fair amount of time trying to document all the cool stuff in Newsletter 38, but it seemed like that might have been a decent newsletter.
I think it was a little more than decent. I was very jealous that you were at the Snowflake event, by the way. And then you're starting with that Snowflake is the most consequential AI and data company on the planet, and that to me was a hook to read through. But I was particularly compelled by what you wrote on, went into a rabbit hole looking into a little bit of what Sam Altman said
Yeah.
during the summit, and I'd love for your you know give us a little bit more than you gave us in the newsletter.
I will do that. And I knew I was going to get myself in a little trouble when I do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Thank you for that. And I did, that newsletter was actually easier to write than most. And I mean that because it just flowed. It was, I spent three and a half. I wish I would have been there for 4, but I spent 3 days out there. And let's just get right to the Altman comment. So he was interviewed by Sridhar Ramaswamy, who's his CEO, and those are his words about the Snowflake being the most consequential AI and data company in the world. Q4 earnings when he knocked the cover off the ball, and then he did it again. And so he's calling his shot, and he has every right to do it. And when he was interviewing Sam Altman during the day one keynote, Sam said something that, I think really resonated with me and I hope others, but he basically said, these AI systems are producing results and are able to achieve things by those that are, deploying them, quote unquote, properly or what have you, that are astounding. And they're a little bit surprising to him. And he's a very good salesman. So let's assume that he's gassing us a little bit, but, I think we've all seen it. But what he said, the part that I thought was the most important, which is why I kind of led with it to make sure folks saw it, is that he's essentially saying if you understand how to take an LLM or a series of LLMs and plug them into the appropriate, framework, Snowflake is a perfect one to consider. And then you run over top of that different ways to connect your collective data sets that sit inside of Snowflake. Or for example, you are able to unlock a tremendous amount of value in an enterprise. Translation, you're going from like the application centric architecture, right? Where like all the data is like siloed and doesn't talk to the other data and the other set, even though it's the same person that's logging into multiple systems. And it's getting into this data or even knowledge centric architecture. And that's what Snowflake in particular is releasing into the wild with a bunch of their updates from Christian Kleinerman, who's the day 2 keynote who killed it, including stuff in the semantic area, which is in views, which is where I get all sorts of nerded out. But to elevate it back up to answer your question, so what Sam Altman said was the companies that are using LLMs within their kind of modern AI enabled operating systems to create all sorts of value are now starting to be able to create a lot of value very fast, and they will continue to do so. And of course, there's compound returns. Challenge, and he didn't say it, but what I, kind of put a little words in his mouth is those that haven't yet gotten to that point, and you don't have to be AI mature. I'm talking like in like the 50% range. You really need to catch up, and move on this because if you don't, unfortunately, now it can call into question like how long will it take you to catch up, and God forbid you get into a position where you cannot catch up because the competitor that you are competing with is too far down the track, and now exponential and the magic of compounding stuff kicks in.
I think that's great, and it brings me. You all know I love analogies, but this one is yours actually. When I saw you a couple weeks ago, we were talking about how how we're looking at this, including the way we were looking at some of the projects we were involved in. That we need to get off the highway 3 axis before, on some of this because we got to catch up. uh, and I don't mean we, by we,
Yeah.
I mean everyone that's involved in this has to catch up with so many different and bringing others along because in so this takes me back so much to what's happened every time new big technology has come into companies and operations, where you're building up here, the teams are here, that gap we all pretend it doesn't really exist, but that affects what gets built so directly and so in such a big way that whether it is by the giving it the having the wrong specifications to it, I'm not understanding how much more it could do for you, so you end up something that's not what you needed and not what you wanted. So going in a bit of a
Yeah.
tangent on what you said, but I think that that's a really it's a really big thing as we think of, which is what that caught my eye in thinking about this. The gap is, I was telling someone earlier today that you go from, you had to jump a puddle, and then all of a sudden there's a pothole, and then there's a crater, and then all of a sudden there's a valley. And
Like,
unless you are
ah.
Tom Cruise on the latest Mission Impossible, you're really not going to be able to jump it. You're not going to be able to catch up. You're not going to. So that is, and it's not to be alarmist. It's not to tell
Mm-mm.
people, hey, forget it. And because that's sometimes the effect you have on this, right? Throw my hands up because I don't know anything about this anyway. So whatever, right? I'm not going to be. There are some really easy practical things that you can do in order to be there as a company, as an individual, as a leader, as a board director. There's so many very specific things. I wanted to shift to something else, and I wanted to ask you about how do you see, completely shifting this to, like, how do you see the AI native platform from Snowflake, like, shifting this balance of power between the technical teams and the business leaders? Could this accelerate this decentralization of this data driven decisions? Because it's been a power play for as long as I've been around.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Tati. And I think one of the reasons I am so bullish on Snowflake is because, and I think it was one of the co-founders that coined this, but they referred to it as the iPhone of data infrastructure. And so the reason they call it that is because they've done such a great job abstracting away so much of the technical complexity of using it and getting value out of it. It doesn't mean that, you don't have to have a bunch of engineers and or a bunch of engineers can't get great value out of it. But by design, it's purpose built to be a lot easier to get value out of, and therefore a lot easier to democratize access to folks that aren't engineers. So domain experts and business folks and so on and so forth. And part of why that gets kind of exciting, and I'll use air quotes kind of as in very exciting, is that some of the things that they revealed and debuted and are, they debuted that they're about to come out, tie to this notion of enabling more better data to be combined into your, AI system, back to Sam Altman's point, and then over top of that, to enable that stuff to then be able to be connected to orchestration layers that are AI agent platform component parts. Translation, it is a lot easier than ever before. And this is not unique to Snowflake per se, but it's a lot easier than ever before for non-technical people, so people that don't sit in the product and engineering org, to be able to build agents that can, take care of certain, workflows. And as we all know, we're all going to have to learn how to, manage and lead not just people, but digital labor, which are agents. And that reality is here, which again goes back to why this notion of AI systems and making sure that you've got your AI system tuned so that you're starting to, do some pretty meaningful things with it. Because if you're not and you don't, it can get pretty, that, as you said, I like those analogies and metaphors with, the Mission Impossible, which I saw that movie. I still can't believe Tom Cruise does all those stunts. It's outrageous and looks like a lot of fun. Sometimes I don't believe it, but I guess it's all true. But yes, it is a platform that is the iPhone of data infrastructure. Just like an iPhone, like the one I have sitting in front of me, is pretty easy in relation to the alternative to use it and what have you. So yeah, that's spot on.
Now, and it ties back to, not tying back to the analogy of getting off the highway at 3x's before, right? So what
Yeah.
does that governance look like? What are some of the simplest things as we are working, developing tools and developing very simple tools, but there are a couple steps before that. before you implement, before you put things together, before there's a governance piece that's really important. What are the guardrails? What are and ultimately at the bottom of that, the diagnostics, like what are the problems you're trying to solve? Can you solve them with this? The likelihood is yes, existing tools can probably solve your problem and can integrate. What has changed even in just the world of LLMs in the past month and a half
Mhm.
is unreal. And when we talk about, this is a great example, I think, of when we're talking about things changing so fast. And like, there's what we were talking about 6 months, forget 6 months ago. And I was telling you a month and a half ago, or some of the things we are discussing, I was doing a talk. I had to reframe a few things because it was no longer true. It was something, there was something different going on. So I'm enjoying asking you questions today. So I'm
This is
gonna,
fun. I mean, go for it. Ask me whatever you'd like.
I on that note, like, what do you think are separating companies that are building this AI first infrastructure from those that are still trying to AIify
I, yeah, I
their existing tool? Is this architectural or is it cultural?
100% cultural. And I'm so glad I was waiting to give the big shout out to my fourth key takeaway, which should have been number one because it was my favorite one, is Michael Forster. So, Michael Forster is the VP of AI at Yum Brands, reports to the Chief AI, Chief Data Officer. And his talk was mind blowing. And the reason it was mind blowing is because to answer your question, Tati, which is the right question, he basically said that, not basically, he said that when Yum Brands decided to commit meaningfully to this notion of AI first, I'm sure they sent a memo out, right? Like all leadership does in this area because it's a lot. But the thing that they did that just captured my imagination is that the CEO, CFO, and 398 of the top executives in that company locked themselves in a room, a conference room, for at least 7 days. I don't know if it was 7 business days. You can correct me, but it was 7 days. And they had a very bespoke, comprehensive curriculum that was purpose built for those executives to go from 0 to 100 in their understanding of what the AI first mindset is. And that's a very important point, right? Because, and I'll give him another shout out because I can remember when he said this, because I asked him, I was like, so when did the light bulb go on for these folks, and why was that so important? And he said, he's like, those like graphics or those images where if you look at it at first, it looks like three people walking down a mountain, and that's what the average person sees when they look at that very quickly. But then if you say to them, hey, that's actually an image that has an embedded image inside of it, there's actually three people surfing a wave, and you're like, what? And then you look at it and then you see it and then you can never unsee it, right?
See it. Yeah,
That was what he said in relation to this 7 day lockdown, because it wasn't just reading a bunch of, and it was great. Like the stuff that they read was bespoke and it was awesome. But then they put their hands in the dirt and I'm putting words in his mouth and let him come and tell us, next time we all get together here. But I think what they did was they hackathoned it up, right? They got in the weeds. They unlocked the understanding by enabling very senior executives to have that magical moment, that high impact moment. Some folks, it happens when they use Notebook LM for the first time. So others, it's a project within Claude or Google, Deep Research, or, you name the product or the tool or the experience. But once that happened, he said that unlocked the collective understanding. And then what he explained is that each of those collective, 400 people, they then helped, kind of cascade that into and down throughout the rest of their various business units and responsibilities. He said it just accelerated the transformation of the understanding and the use of AI first thinking and tools and ultimately systems as opposed to tools. And he said the last thing he said, which I thought was really interesting too, he's like, it happened faster than we would have imagined. And it also got to a place, because I asked him, I said, well, what about the people that are like, yeah, I don't know about that, right? Or like, he's like, it got to a place where so many of us were all in and moving down the track that it made it really difficult for those folks to not be a part of it because they were seeing all of the impact and the productivity and the fun that folks were having and are having. And yeah, I told them, I was like, I can't believe what you just shared. I'm like, do you realize how many people would love to hear you walk through that talk more broadly, like everybody? And he laughed and said, yeah, I guess, he's just busy heads down doing the work. So there are lots of great examples like that, but big shout out to Young Brands and Michael Forster, who had, I think it was my favorite talk of the summit last week.
And what I love about that part and how you talked about that is around this notion that oftentimes companies are thinking, and executives, and specifically when I speak about, on the customer experience side, operations side, retail, it's either all or not. This is
Yeah.
all or nothing mentality. Either I'm doing all of it and I have all the budget and all the things, and that's something we've been talking all along about. No, you're really looking at modular approach. You're really looking at multiple stakeholders, multiple support stakeholders that are helping you. You can't just give this out to whoever it is. You can't just you can't hand it over to someone else to create this transformation for you. Your team has to be part of it. You got to be part of it. But you're gonna need different people and in different areas that are supporting you with this. So not to make this too long, but
No,
I have
go.
one
We're
more
good.
question for you, which was this is a bit of a modern going back to school,
Yeah.
right? Equivalent to and so when we think about that for executive teams and boards and everyone that is in charge, when it comes to AI, what does that look like? And you talked a little bit about the hackathons, but
Yeah.
who should be designing that curriculum? Who's in charge of that? Who should you be? I'm an executive. Who should I be listening to?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I was asked on a podcast a similar question a few days ago, and I gave, I think, a kind of an annoying Alec answer, which was, and here comes me getting in trouble. I don't think nearly as many people that talk about it have actually done it. Right. I don't, I really don't. I walked around the summit, like I said, 3.5 days, went to all the various booths, went to a bunch of talks. I was geeking out, talking to a lot of people, and I'm not criticizing, quote unquote people. I really do believe in, that not nearly as many people have actually, spun something up and had that magical moment by vectorizing a database and creating a semantic layer over top of it, and enabling, an ontology aware system to do magical things, right? And those magical things are things that any company can do. And so I think the answer is, you really, I think, on one hand, you probably want to think about what Michael and his, chief AI officer were able to achieve. And maybe you can't get your CEO, CFO, and top forward executives to basically do a boot camp for 7 days. But I do think, with a third party, involved, like I do think you likely need a third party. You likely need a cross section of cross functional leaders, which reminds me of something that you and I are working on, Tati, in terms of a lot of these questions that we've been getting from really big companies. Like, what does that COE look like? Is it centralized, decentralized, federated this, federated that? What's the profile of the talent? Because here's a scary thing, in case folks aren't aware. Somebody that leads your IT department isn't necessarily the same person that leads your AI strategy or implementation. This is not tech tools. These are systems, and they need to be built and orchestrated, and humans need to be all sorts of, there's a lot of human considerations. Not to suggest that IT can't do that, but, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Andreessen Horowitz, or maybe it was someone. I wasn't Andreessen Horowitz, but someone said that HR might become the new IT, because we're going to have all this digital labor that's going to be in place because these AI systems are going to have, right? And like that, think about that, right? Just that one idea. So it's a long-winded, overly verbose answer. Like, I think you've got to have an expert number one, which is likely third party, because otherwise, there's different questions to consider. But it's got to be a third party. It's got to be very constrained and very specific in terms of what are we trying to get out of this. And you've got to have as many people in that room, hands in dirt, not reading about it only, not talking about it, and what have you, but having that humble confidence to be like, all right, we're going to figure this out. I'm going to try to code, using these developer tools that are democratized. So stuff like that.
Now that's awesome, and I had a comment to that, which is really I heard from multiple, as you know, I'm in several board organizations, and I heard a couple comments in the past weeks of folks saying, well, boards are not necessarily looking for an AI expert, or they're not looking for a CIO, CTO profile necessarily to be. And I realized how far off the real need that was, because you don't need, and not to say that person couldn't be, but what you need is an understanding of how that applies to the different functions and to the different businesses and to the ways in which a company makes their money and creates value. And that's across the board. I love that you mentioned HR, but you look at HR, you look at legal, you look obviously at operations and everyone else that's related to that. So we're not, again, it goes back to sort of these old, we can do a whole episode, by the way, on old school frameworks that people are trying to fit. And the image in my mind is like that toy that you're trying to fit the square peg into the round hole.
Yeah.
People are trying to put this old tech frameworks into this AI revolution that they're going through right now. And of course it's not working, because it's not going to work, because we're looking at something that's very different and interacts in a very different way, even if it is technology. So anyways, I think we have more things to talk about, but I think we save a little bit for the next one.
I agree with you. I appreciate the questions, Tati, and I hope I didn't bore you with all the explanations on Newsletter 38, but it was a hell of an experience out there. And I'm not a stockbroker or an investment advisor, but look at the chart and you'll see why Snowflake, I'm so bullish on it. It's just up and to the right for very good reason.
Sounds great, and we'll see you again soon.
Sounds great. See ya.